Bobby Darin died on December 20th, 1973. He was 37 years old. He had been performing professionally since he was 19. In the 18 years between, he had recorded Splish Splash, Mac the Knife, Beyond the Sea, and more than 500 other songs. He had won Grammy Awards. He had acted in films that earned him an Oscar nomination. He had performed in Las Vegas. He had played Carnegie Hall. He had hosted his own television show. He had done all of this in 18 years. That is not a coincidence of productivity. It is the output of a person who understood from a very early age that the time available to him was not what he would have chosen. And he had known, for much of those 18 years, that the heart condition he had been born with was going to shorten whatever time he had. He had known this since childhood, not as an abstract future possibility, as a medical fact delivered to him and his family when he was very young. The rheumatic fever he survived as a child had damaged his heart in ways that the medicine of that era could not repair. He was going to die young. He did not know exactly when. The doctors did not know exactly when. What he knew was that time was not a resource he could afford to treat casually. That the standard calculation most people make, there will always be more time, the next performance will be fine, the important work can begin later, was not available to him. What he knew was that he needed to be fast. And he was. There is a particular intensity that comes from a life lived with that awareness. Not urgency in the anxious sense, not a frantic quality or a visible desperation, a precision. Bobby Darin moved through his career with the precision of someone who understood, at a level most people don't reach until much later, that time was not unlimited. He didn't waste performances. He didn't waste opportunities. He didn't waste afternoons. And in 1969, he spent one afternoon on the set of This Is Tom Jones. He had about 4 years left. Neither of them knew that. But one of them was carrying an awareness of time that the other did not carry in the same way. And that awareness, the specific quality of a person who has been told early that they are not going to live as long as they might have hoped, changed the way Bobby Darin moved through an afternoon, through a conversation, through a performance. It made him precise. It made him honest about what mattered. And it made what he said on that set in 1969 something that Tom Jones remembered long after the cameras had stopped rolling and the set had been struck and the television program had moved on to its next episode. Bobby Darin talked about music differently from most performers. Most performers talked about songs, about the specific numbers they had recorded or were recording, about the audiences they reached, about the practical realities of a career moving through venues and television schedules and record company relationships. Bobby Darin talked about what music was for. He had spent enough time thinking about the value of things, forced to it by the condition of his health and the awareness of limitation that accompanied it, to have arrived at some conclusions that most performers only reached, if they reached them at all, much later. Music was not entertainment in the trivial sense. It was a form of communication that operated below the level of language. It reached people in places that language couldn't reach. And the people it reached were often the people most in need of being reached, the people carrying something they couldn't name, sitting in a room in the dark, and finding, in a song, some version of the thing they couldn't say. He talked about this on the set that afternoon. Not formally, not as a prepared speech, in the way that people talk when they are in the company of someone they believe can understand what they are saying. Tom Jones listened. He was a performer who had known from the working men's clubs of Wales exactly what Bobby Darin was describing. The people who came to those clubs were not coming for entertainment in the sophisticated sense. They were coming because something in the music gave them access to feelings they carried the rest of the week and could not afford to express in other contexts. Bobby Darin knew that. Tom Jones knew that in his body. And sitting on the set of a television program that was, in its format, very much concerned with the entertainment as product version of music, they talked about the other version. At some point in the afternoon, Bobby Darin said something that people who were there remembered afterward. He said, "The best songs are the ones people need. Not want, need." He wasn't talking about popularity. He wasn't talking about chart positions or radio play or the commercial indicators of success. He was talking about the specific usefulness of music to specific people at specific moments in their lives. The song that a person comes to because they have no other way to access what they are carrying. The recording that a person plays on a difficult night because something in it gets to the place that language can't reach. The music that someone needs, not passively enjoys, actively needs. Bobby Darin had made music like that, and he had done it with a precision born of knowing from childhood that the time available to him for making things was finite in a way that most people's time is not. Tom Jones said nothing immediately. He was thinking about the working men's clubs, about the men who came there on Friday nights carrying the weight of the week, about the songs they sang and the songs they needed to hear, about what those songs were actually doing in those rooms. Bobby Darin had put words to something Tom Jones had known in his body since he was a teenager, but he remembered it. Bobby Darin had been underestimated by the music industry for most of his career. Not by audiences. Audiences had always responded to him with the clarity that audiences have when something is genuinely good and the intermediaries have not yet had a chance to explain why it shouldn't be. Not by audiences. Audiences responded to him immediately. But the industry, the people who categorized performers and assigned them to boxes and decided what kind of artist they were allowed to be, had never quite known what to do with him. He had started as a rock and roll performer in the late 1950s. Splish Splash was novelty enough that it was not meant to be taken seriously. Then Mac the Knife had demonstrated that he could do something with a standard that most contemporary performers couldn't approach. That transition from rock novelty to accomplished jazz-inflected pop had confused the industry. It didn't fit the boxes they had. Then he had moved into folk music, then country, then a political period in the late 1960s after Robert Kennedy's assassination, when he grew a beard and played coffee houses and the Las Vegas circuit was uncertain whether to take him back. They took him back, but the confusion never fully cleared. Bobby Darin was a performer who refused to stay in the place the industry built for him. He moved because movement was one of the ways he understood his own life, not as a series of settled positions, but as a continuous forward motion. Someone who had been told from childhood that his time was limited had learned early not to stand still. Tom Jones had his own version of that quality. The music industry of the mid-1960s had not known what to do with him either. He was not obviously rock, he was not obviously pop, he was not easy listening, and he was not soul, and he was not any of the categories the British music press had available. He had arrived in 1965 with a voice that didn't fit existing templates, and a stage presence that made the templates irrelevant. The industry had spent several years trying to place him, and eventually given up on placing him, and simply accepted that he was what he was. Two performers who had both refused to stay where they were put, both talented beyond the category available to them, both aware in their different ways that the space between performances was not safe, that stopping moving was not an option. They sat across from each other on the This Is Tom Jones set in 1969, and the afternoon found something. Not a professional alliance, not a collaboration that produced a record or a shared performance that the public could point to. Something less commercial and more durable than that. An understanding between two people who had both refused to be reduced to the simplest available description of themselves, and who recognized, sitting across from each other in a television studio, that the other person had done the same thing. That kind of recognition does not require long sentences. Sometimes it requires only an afternoon. Bobby Darin left the This Is Tom Jones set and went back to his life. It is difficult, knowing what came after, to look at that afternoon and not feel the weight of what neither person in the room could see. Bobby Darin had 4 years. He did not know it. Tom Jones did not know it. The crew on the set did not know it. The format of the television show, designed to produce pleasant entertainment from the meeting of talented performers, was not built to accommodate the knowledge of how much time remained. But Bobby Darin knew the general fact, if not the specific date. He had always known the general fact. He continued performing. He released more records. He appeared on more television programs. He went through the medical procedures that the later years of his life required, the open heart surgery in 1971, the recovery, the return to performing that demonstrated a resilience that his doctors considered remarkable. He kept moving, as he always had. And in December 1973, he died during surgery. Complications from the heart that had always been the limiting factor. He was 37 years old. He had recorded Mac the Knife at 22. He had been told at 7 that his time was limited. He had spent 30 years in between doing more with the time available to him than most people accomplish across a full-length life. Tom Jones was 33 years old when Bobby Darin died. He was mid-career, mid-residency. The Las Vegas years were well underway. The television program had run. The records were selling. He had decades still ahead of him. But the afternoon on the set in 1969 had left something. Not a lesson exactly. Not advice that could be written down and followed. Something more like a frequency. The specific quality of a conversation with someone who understood what music was for, not theoretically, not commercially, but from the inside of a life that had depended on that understanding. Tom Jones spoke about Bobby Darin in later years with a particular directness reserved for people who had said something true and been heard. He said, "Bobby knew what he was doing in a way that most people don't know until it's too late to do it differently." He did not elaborate beyond that. He did not need to. That sentence was not just about music. It was about the specific quality of a person who had been forced to clarity by circumstance, and had used that clarity to make things that lasted. Bobby Darin's recordings lasted. Mac the Knife still played on radios 50 years later. Beyond the Sea still found its way into films and television programs, and the corners of people's lives where music goes when it becomes permanently associated with a feeling. He had made those things at 22 and 23, not because of luck, not because the conditions were ideal or the industry was cooperative or the timing was favorable in the straightforward sense. Because he had looked at the available time and made a decision about how to use it. Because he knew he needed to move fast. The afternoon on the This Is Tom Jones set in 1969 was not the last time Bobby Darin performed publicly, but it was one of the last times he sat across from another performer, another person doing the same complicated, important, necessary thing, and talked honestly about what it was for. Tom Jones remembered the afternoon. He remembered what was said. He carried it with him. The best songs are the ones people need, not want, need. That is precisely the kind of sentence that survives the person who said it. That is what Bobby Darin left on that set.